want to tell you a little bit about economic anthropology and how anthropologists consider the economy. At the beginning of this chapter, Guess goes through the different ways in which people get food and organizing themselves with what is called foraging or hunting and gathering, horticulture, which is small-scale plantings, pastoralism, which is herding animals, and agriculture, which is a more intensive form of horticulture, but it's not as intensive as something else I read about. What's after this? Industrial agriculture, where you're really intensifying your production and you're putting in tractors and all these things. And in the 1950s, let's say, most people believed that all of these other forms of producing food were inefficient and stupid. And that as soon as we could get our tractors in there and create big combines and harvest lots of corn and make corn palaces in South Dakota, as I've just learned from one of our students, that everything would be better as long as we got rid of those inefficient hunters and gatherers. What are we learning about this industrial agriculture thing? It's not efficient. It produces a lot of food, but at what cost? The enormous investments that you have to make in fossil fuels and fertilizer, and it seems to be the reverse. It seems to be the dumb thing to do. But it's a good setting the stage for different forms of life which anthropologists have documented. All of these forms have grown and developed, and some of them get bigger and then they fade out and change over time. And all of these economies and ways of people making a living have been an interaction and trading along. And so Guess says that economic anthropologists and anthropologists in general emphasize how people move around, interact, trade across. That's just part of being human, our mobility and our interactions with each other in terms of trade. And so it's very important that we understand that humans have always been interconnected to each other long before the idea of globalization, the global economy. People have been interconnected, but they became interconnected in different ways over time. Now, anthropologists also document different kinds of exchange outside of simply market exchange, which is what we know the best. So one of the things that anthropologists document is the ways of what we call reciprocity, give and take of everyday life, where people might give things to another person, not expecting anything in return. So there's a couple different forms of reciprocity. One we call generalized reciprocity, which is basically you're not keeping track. You're giving and sharing food and other things without accounting for them. Another form of reciprocity is called balanced reciprocity, in which you're expecting something of equal or maybe even greater value over time. So it's balanced out. By the way, do we have any generalized reciprocity in our society? Generalized reciprocity, where people are giving stuff but not necessarily keeping track of how much they're, yeah.
Christmas.
Christmas.
Or like birthdays.
Christmas and birthdays. So maybe for you, since you're still kids, that is a form of generalized reciprocity where you're getting stuff. And it's not expected that you're necessarily supposed to give that back. So, but yeah, so that can be an occasion of generalized reciprocity. There's another place that we see in our own society a lot of generalized reciprocity. How much are your parents charging you for rent? They haven't been keeping track of your food. You haven't had to pay them back for their meals. No. Fortunately, most of us, my dad always used to threaten me with that, but for most of us, right, this is an area of generalized reciprocity. There's not an expectation that you're going to pay them back, although there might be an expectation that later on you're going to be taking care of them. But in general, for now, you can enjoy the generalized reciprocity. Balanced reciprocity. Well, Balanced reciprocity is when you're giving something, but in some ways, at some point, you're thinking it's going to be about an equal exchange. Do we have any balanced reciprocity in our society? Okay, so little informal exchanges or favors. It's going to work out, or I'm going to do this for you now, but down the road, I'm expecting if I need something, I'll get that back. Yeah, that's a balanced reciprocity. Have any of you ever experienced did any of you ever have a graduation party where somebody's parents, they graduate from high school and you go there and you're supposed to give them something, like money? Does this ring a bell? Yeah. If I go to a graduation party and I'm of the parental generation, what's the first question I want to know when I think about how much money I'm going to give this graduate? There's certainly a closeness aspect to it. You're probably going to give more to the people that are closer to you. But usually you're going to ask something about this, especially if you had your own graduation party. Yeah.
If they're going to continue their education.
Are you going to give them more if they're continuing their education? Bribing them into education continuance. Maybe, yeah. Oftentimes you ask, hey, what did they give me? What did my kid get? Because you want to be balanced. Don't want to overwhelm somebody. If they gave your kid $100 on your graduation, you want to match it up. You want to be in the ballpark. So, yeah, I would say when you start to exchange things in these ways, you enter this world of what they call balanced reciprocity. For example, well, here's a good thing. We're going to talk later on about cultural capital. If you're going to a dinner party at somebody's house and they have invited you or your family to dinner, what should you bring? Yes.
Depends, right? It depends on if it's a potluck style thing.
Yeah, let's potlucks. No, it's not a potluck. They've just invited you. You're just going over there for food.
I'm just bringing myself then.
You're just bringing yourself. Oh, I have to teach you some cultural capital right here and now. This is important to your life.
Wine or dessert?
A bottle of wine, maybe a dessert. Not just yourself. There's a few occasions you can get away with that. But otherwise you're going to be, if you do that too often, you are the gift, yeah. If you do that too often, you're going to fall into another category, which is called negative reciprocity. It's when you're getting more than you should be getting over time, either because you're just going around and pretty soon you're not going to get invited anymore. Also, you should invite them over to your house, balance it out, move it around. And maybe if you have a system where nobody brings anything, then you can get away with that, but just be careful. Flowers if you don't like to drink wine. Bring something. There are also systems of exchange that function more along the lines of redistribution. So in redistribution, goods, stuff, money flows into a central place and then is distributed out in different ways. So it's not necessarily, you're not just going to get back what you put in. It's like you put all this money into one place, a central place, and then it's distributed out. Do we have any forms of redistribution in our society? The roads. How do we get roads? Taxes, yes. The roads, exactly. So taxes are famously a mechanism of redistribution in which you flow things into a central authority, and they're supposed to give you stuff like roads and schools. Most of the time they just give you police and soldiers, but they're supposed to give you roads and schools. That's the idea here. But there are other forms of redistribution in other societies. I've been threatening to show you a film called Uncle's Big Mucka, which I eventually will, in which things are flowing up to Uncle, the big man, but they're going to be redistributed down in a big giveaway. So, these are ways in which people interact with each other outside of what we might consider the capitalist market economy, or different from the capitalist market economy. And they are still today within our society, even though we predominantly have a market economy. Now, as I was saying, people all over the world have been interconnected forever. The guest begins to talk about the origins of the global economy. And I want to start this off with a summary from a book called Questioning Collapse by a number of archaeologists that just tried to briefly tell us about what were the most powerful and largest cities in the world in various times. And they said if we went back 1,500 years ago to 500 AD or 500 CE, you'd find these cities in Mexico and what is now Mexico, what is now Italy, and what is now China. And then if you fast forwarded another to about 1,000 years ago, the most exciting places would be in Peru, Iraq, and Central Asia. And if you go to 500 years ago, it would be in China, India, and Turkey. And one of the points they're trying to make in this is that there's not actually a geographical determinism. These cities rise and fall, and so they're arguing against some of the work of, say, Jared Diamond, for example, about the idea that human development is caused by agriculture, and they say there's not really a geographical determinism to this. But what I want to underscore here is that during this time, as of about 500 years ago, and throughout this time, these European societies were they weren't on the main trade routes. The main trade route was the Silk Road, which was across Asia and would reach Italy. Italy was at the end of that. And so the main and most exciting places to be, at least in Eurasia, were across this range here. Oh, you can't see that. Let's see if I can make you see that. Right there. Now these places also had exciting things going on, and they had lots of trade back and forth through here. There's some very famous Aztec markets, for example, but they weren't connected to each other. This area was interconnected, and the Europeans wanted to get in on that trade. They wanted this stuff from China and India. And so the problem was, though, that they were rather boxed in. And they were boxed in by what was the most exciting and advanced place at the time, which was the Islamic Empire, which had very quickly expanded from Saudi Arabia to stretch across northern Africa and way out here to India, and even had taken over, there's Sicily. We talked about Sicily being taken over for a while, and had taken over much of what is now Spain, Portugal, what we call the Iberian Peninsula, and even part of southwestern France. And we owe a tremendous amount to the Islamic Empire. Arabic numerals, for example, the preservation of Greek texts, some of the best cultivation mechanisms. You can see the influence of the Islamic Empire in Spanish, for example, in words like azúcar, which is where we get the word for sugar, but that's actually an Arabic word, or the word ojalá, which is translated as I hope in Spanish, but actually originally means may Allah grant that. So there's a kind of interaction there, which is interesting. Now, these countries in Europe were trying to get access to the goods from Asia, but they were starting to get blocked off by some of these and shut out of some of the trade routes. And so they started to sail down around the coast of Africa to look for a different way to get over into Europe. Now, this is the Iberian Peninsula I was talking about in 1491. You can see that Portugal has actually become basically a country. Spain is not a thing yet. It's more the kingdoms of the Castile and Aragon are the most important places. But here we have the Iberian Peninsula in 1491. So let us say you were living on the Iberian Peninsula in 1491 and the year changes to 1492.
Time to sail the ocean blue.
Columbus, that's what we all think. But actually, if you were living in the Iberian Peninsula at the time, what would have been the most important event of your life in 1492? The thing you heard the most about. 1492 is the fall of the Kingdom of Granada, which is the last Muslim caliphate on the Iberian Peninsula. So the people who would eventually call themselves Spaniards and Portuguese have been involved in a gradual process of what is later called the Reconquest, or trying to push and get land back from Islam. And with the fall of Granada, the Islamic Empire was pushed out of the Iberian Peninsula. It was also the year that they expelled the Jews from this peninsula. So before this year, before this time, it's not that everybody got along, but Jews, Christians, and Muslims were all interacting on this peninsula in relative peace. It wasn't heaven on earth, but it was a relatively peaceful time. But yes, at that time, though, we have Columbus sailing under the crown of the sponsorship of the Kingdom of Castile and Aragon and sailing across finding the Americas. He was looking for, of course, India. That's why we get the name Indians, because he thought and claimed that he was in India, but he didn't get there. Columbus had wanted to sail with the Portuguese, but they turned him down because they knew the world was bigger than he said it was. But neither of them were expecting to find the Americas. This would then lead to the establishment of some of the longest and biggest empires, the transoceanic empires of both the Portuguese and the Spanish, from around 1500 up until around 1800, if not longer in some places. And so you have these two very tiny countries in Europe who were not really, they're on the periphery of things, but they established these transoceanic places. Maria, what do these Europeans do in the world? What do they do out there? Yeah, what are they looking for? What are they trying to do? I think you said they're trying to reshape their position in the world, and using the resources that they find in these places to buy their way into these trade routes. So they first ransack anything they can in terms of silver and gold. They also encounter a number of political and economic systems which are very different from their own. Now, this is before there were any anthropologists, but we have this preliminary encounter between Europeans and all kinds of hunters and gatherers and different agriculturalists and different ways of organizing their life. One of the key moments in Spanish colonialism was the discovery of a huge mountain of silver in Potosi, which would provide almost half of the world's silver supply over the next 200 or 300 years. It was an enormously important place, and it allowed the Europeans to buy their way in to the trade routes and to reshape them with the silver that they got from Potosi. The Silver City That Changed the World, a book by Chris Lane. Potosi. Anybody ever heard of Potosi before? Anybody know where Potosi is? It is in South America. We're getting there. Yeah, we're close. It's in Bolivia, but we don't know that. Anyway, it was an amazing city. If I asked you this 400 years ago, you would definitely know where Potosi was. Everybody knew where it was. It was larger than London and Paris at its time. So there's that big mountain of silver there. It had people from all over the world trying to get into that economy. One of the first grid systems of the city. It's been called the first global city. People are coming there from all over the world to get in on this silver trade. Some people believe that the mint sign for Potosi is the origin of our dollar sign. If you go to Potosi, they'll tell you that they think the dollar sign comes from the mint sign of Potosi. There's some debate about whether that's true or not. But what we do know is that when the US dollar was being first established, nobody wanted it because they didn't trust that the US dollar had any backing. And the crucial move that the US dollar made is they said, this dollar, this paper dollar, can be traded in for 1 silver peso. So we actually had the dollar was originally backed by the peso, which is, for those of you who know your economic history, seems absurd today that we would have the dollar backed by a silver peso. But it brings up an important point about currency and money in general, which is that, well, what is our currency based on? Social norms, and especially what kind of a norm? When you hand me money, yeah, I need to believe that I can do something with that money. And that's why nobody believed that the dollar was going to do anything. But if you put something behind it, then it has trust. So money is something that's extremely socially constructed. Actually, now we don't have any backing for money. It's just paper. It's like you're walking around with this stuff, and it's just a piece of paper. And so it's only because you believe that this paper will buy you something later that it's worth anything. It's strange how attached we get to this, though. I was out to dinner once, one of those balanced reciprocity things, and we were splitting up the check. And it came down to the old days when a dollar meant something. It came down to the last 50 cents. And this guy's like, well, I don't have 50 cents. I said, well, neither do I. He said, all right, fine. I'll give you 50 cents. Oh, the look on Maddie's face. What happened?
I got in trouble for that when I was a kid.
You got in trouble for that as a
freaked me
kid?
out.
What? You never like gave your mom a quarter like this? 75 cents now. Did anybody get this weird pit of your stomach feeling like something had gone terribly wrong? What?
I've done that before.
Where does that feeling come from? It's just a piece of paper. It's not even worth that much.
That's illegal. I don't think it is.
I don't think it's technically illegal for me to destroy my own money.
It is illegal.
Under Section 333 of the U.S. Criminal Code, whoever mutilates, cuts, defaces, disfigures, or unites or cements together, or does any other thing to any bank bill, draft note, or other evidence of debt issued by any national banking association or Federal Reserve Bank or the Federal Reserve System, it cuts off.
Reading him is right.
It doesn't tell me what's going to happen.
Well, let's find out what's going to happen.
It's gonna be a fine of more money.
Oh wait, you'd be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 6 months or both.
Not more than 6 months. In the old days, people used to light their cigarettes with money just to show that they didn't care. But now I'm getting in trouble for it. So, two huge things happen under this colonial order. One, you have the amplification of silver going into the world's economy and transforming the world's economy, putting European powers more at the center or the top of things. And from that, or along with that, you have this process of intensifying the enslavement of African peoples and dragging them into the New World or into the Americas, mostly for sugar plantations. And so, as I've told you, 40% of that trade probably went into Brazil and several pretty small islands in the Caribbean, at least in comparison to the mainland, like Jamaica, Saint-Domingue, which later became Haiti, received 1 million enslaved Africans each. Again, most of this was done because of the sugar trade. So I think I've showed you this maybe in the very first or second class about how important Saint-Domingue was to the French colonial effort. They were producing sugar, coffee, indigo, and cotton. This is a drawing of people cutting sugar cane. It was an enormously expensive and productive process, and it's why most people were taken from their homelands to do this work. Some anthropologists have also argued that in addition to transforming the sugar cane into sugar, that this process became a template for the factory production that would happen later in Europe and in the United States. The way these plantations were organized and the very strict ways in which you needed to process that sugar in order to get it into usable form was something that would be a basis for or a template for organizing factory production later on. Now, I want to pause here for a second on Haiti because it was originally Saint-Domingue. The United States was the first independent country in the Americas. Haiti is the second independent country. It won its independence from France in in a very bloody revolution and became the first black-led republic in the world. For doing that, it was severely penalized. The French made them pay a debt in order to be recognized. They were basically boxed out of the world economy. The United States definitely didn't want to hear anything about it because it meant that the enslaved people could rise up and form their own government. People didn't want to believe it. But in addition to that, it's crucial to the history of the United States because without the Haitian Revolution, it is very doubtful that Napoleon would have sold this huge piece of land so cheaply. Napoleon needed money for his European wars, but he was relying on Haiti, or Saint-Domingue, to produce sugar for that. Once he could not get control of the island of Haiti and it had become independent, he lost interest in this huge piece of land. Now, we usually don't learn about this. We learn about the Louisiana Purchase, but we don't learn how it was actually the Haitian Revolution which made this possible, or at least made it cheaper than it would have been. And so when people are demonizing Haitians today in the United States, we owe them. It's not, they were very important to us. So, before anthropology ever came around, and this is why this is so important to me and to understand where all this stuff came from and where we are, you had, as Ria told us, these empires that were reshaping the world. You had Potosi and later on the mines and silver mines in Mexico, which enabled these powers to become more dominant. You had the sugar plantations, mainly from the Caribbean and Brazil, which took what was once this exotic spice, azúcar, which they got, of course, from the Islamic Empire, and turned it into a sugar that was available for the working classes. For me and for many historians, it's hard to imagine how there would have been, or the Industrial Revolution would have looked like without these precursors, resources, and having sugarcane being produced and transported all this way, and having access to this kind of silver and gold production. But as the northern countries industrialized, we tended to forget about where these things come from. We don't know about Potosi. We don't know about Saint-Domingue. We don't know how important Haiti was to the United States because those places are seen as backward. And so we have the world becomes arranged as this hierarchy of races with some people producing and some people consuming. And this idea that the way in which people behave and people relate to each other was because of their race or where they lived in the world. And so we have this whole economic system which has been set up and into which the anthropologists step. But it's already, in some ways, the world has already been reshaped in this hierarchized way.